Hello. I am Sarah Howell. This is actually my first solo live with the Anti-Bias Educator. Welcome, welcome. See if folks come in, but today we are going to be talking about the concept of time. This is something that's been on my mind for a few reasons, and I think it's good, especially at this time, to kind of process and bring that in and share your thoughts. So I would love to see if anyone else also has some thoughts about it and kind of what we can do to make time in the classroom, why it's important to do that. So I'll let people come on in. And yeah, I am the other half of the Anti-Bias Educator to Stephanie Tellis. I am Sarah Howell, and Stephanie and I have been teaming up for some projects recently, and I'm happy to kind of share a little bit today for our Monday update. So we'll give folks another chance. The topic of today is time. Today is November 2nd, the day after Daylight Savings Time. We think about this concept of time as something set in stone, and it affects our lives in so many different ways, and also culturally is so different depending on the culture that you grew up in and how time is valued and kind of what it is meant for. So those cultural definitions and practices I think can define a lot of ways of how we approach our day and how we approach our relationship to time. But also time is kind of a way for us to process and make sense of the world, and also to show what we value and what our what's important to us, right? When you spend time with a friend, what is that? How is that time spent? How is that relationship helped? Or spending time with families. I think now, especially during COVID, we're realizing, the passage of time in different ways. In some ways it feels like, at least my life, somebody who was raised in, typical Western white culture in America, right? Time is kind of a concept or a way to value productivity and getting things done, and being in a global pandemic kind of forces us to slow down and take stock about what is really important to us. Time is finite. It seems like it's constant, but it always, is changing kind of how we move through the world. Also I've been reflecting on, just as a teacher, my role as a teacher, and how I'm actually quite bound by this concept of time, from my day-to-day schedule, and how there's specific things I'm supposed to be doing at particular times of the day, and how even in my planning time, that pressure to get caught up on whether it's grading or planning my next lesson, or adapting my lessons for teaching in a blended learning environment. If I looked at my schedule now, it looks like I have all the time in the world, and yet it feels like when I move through the day, I go from, 7:30 to, 4:30, and I don't know where the day has gone. Time is strange like that. And school in and of itself is an interesting lens to think about time, considering the cultural history, at least in the United States, of schools being established and run to maximize efficiency, modeled after factories that popped up during the Industrial Revolution, right? Like, how do we maximize the process of learning for the delivery of information in a way that is most efficient? And the pandemic, again, has kind of turned that on its head. We're not able to be in person anymore. So what does education look like if you're not physically in a school building? Or if you are in a school building, how has that been modified? And, so we're no longer kind of bound by these schedules of, how you're supposed to move through your education, or at least in the school that I'm in, how you're supposed to, progress along your learning trajectory. Time also is very culturally relevant. I mentioned this at the beginning, but how different cultures value, whether it's productivity of accomplishing, things in a time frame, or, checking things off of a to-do list, but also, many cultures value that one-on-one, relationship. And so, when you're, with another person, whether a family member or a friend, and I mean, I've experienced this too, just like spending time with loved ones and with family and friends, time seems suspended. And that is the essence of kind of our humanity, is connecting with other people. And so, do I really have to run off to, the errand that I was doing, or does what really matter, that conversation, that relationship that I'm having with somebody? There's also personal, and I think this one's really interesting, but what are our personal relationships to time, whether it's through milestones or memories that we have, even emotions such as joy and grief. How do those moments come up for us? If it's, how, you can be transported to a moment of time, just with a song, or maybe a familiar smell, or, a family recipe that's been passed down through generations. That those moments, those memories can kind of transport us from the present to the past and back again. And I think those are, worth acknowledging and kind of honoring. Today is November 2nd. It's 3 months from the day that my mom kind of suddenly passed away in August, earlier this year. And it feels a world away, and it feels so recent. And, days go by, and, my life feels like it continues on, and as it was. And then there are days where it feels completely upended and unfamiliar. But, that passage of time, and they say that time heals all wounds, which I'm not sure if that's entirely true. It doesn't feel linear in that sense. And today is November 2nd. It's the day before our national election. So how do we, that is another day that's been on the calendar for years, and something that has been anticipated. And, we are very aware, our students too, of how big tomorrow feels, and how big the outcome of our national election feels, as well as local elections, and kind of what that implication, or what that implication might have on the next of, how our society continues to go, the conversations that we have with each other, the feelings of anxiety or joy, and so often I think as educators we get caught up in the day-to-day or sticking to the plan or sticking to the lesson that you had spent hours reworking because now you're teaching it virtually as opposed to in person. And the pressure of the school year and the curriculum and kind of making your way through it, I think can be very big, but it is important. I think it's critical for us to press pause at particular times and take that time, create that space for students and for ourselves as educators to kind of reflect and share. I think unfortunately we have seen publicly an erosion of the ability for people to connect and have, honest dialogue and kind of come together to talk or to share without fear of being ridiculed. And I think that hasn't been modeled. And I think as teachers, we can help to provide that space and to provide that support for students, modeling that gift of time and kind of pressing pause on what you might have originally have planned for whether it's Tuesday or Wednesday or later this week, kind of providing that time for students to share and to, even practice self-care, like practice mindfulness, practice things that kind of help us to slow down and to think about what really matters and what, our hopes and our joys and our dreams, what they are for, whether it's our classroom or our school community or our bigger communities as a country. How can we build those? How can we provide those spaces? And it's important to kind of slow down and not just forge on because, that's what you feel pressured to do. Mindfulness in and of itself is the act of kind of stopping that busyness or pausing those actions that, take us from point A to point B in our day. Those things that keep us busy and kind of allow us the space and the time to focus inward on the signals that are in our bodies, either mentally, emotionally, or physically. And thinking about what are those signals, what are those feelings that we have, what are they telling us? Acts of bias and of harm, of racism can be kind of captured in our bodies and held physically. So when we are doing, this anti-bias or anti-racist work, or other work that kind of helps to heal from the negative effects of oppression and, power, we have to provide that space to check in on ourselves. Like when I feel stressed, I feel the tension in my shoulders or maybe in my chest. And so how do you kind of identify that and work through it? Where do you think about where you carry that tension, or, where do you feel those emotions of joy or exuberance? I think modeling that for our students too is possible, and I think is a really good practice that you can bring into the classroom in small or in large amounts. I saw a post on Instagram the other day by Shade Lythcott. It was actually shared by a friend of mine. Shade is the CEO of the National Black Theater, and I just thought the post that she had shared, I think was posted with a few other folks as well. It kind of made me laugh at first, but then it really struck me. The post, it was text. It said, "Next week has been exhausting." And we haven't even gotten to next week. And I think that emotional burden of anticipation and stress of the unknown, which I think we're feeling on a daily basis in this pandemic, is exhausting. And I think, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to, what are we doing to take care of ourselves? What are we doing to model for our students how to create space for that thinking and feeling and naming emotions? What are we doing to kind of create the space in our lives to celebrate? So much feels so heavy. And so how do we acknowledge the joy? How do we acknowledge the things that we value and that bring us life, that really lift us up? And do we provide room for our students to do that? I think to connect to who we are and what we value and maybe who we love, I think can get us out of that feeling of feeling exhausted. So my ask for you, and I think this is, it can feel big, but there are resources. And I think my ask is that no matter what the outcome of Tuesday and Wednesday and probably beyond, think about how you can press pause for yourself and for your students. So how are you going to provide the time to share or to think, or to talk about and maybe process and debrief, what happens in the outcome of the election? And probably we won't know immediately, but how do we kind of create that space for dialogue? Students definitely notice what you choose to do or not do in the classroom as an educator. And I think, skipping this opportunity to talk and share about the election and maybe their excitement or interest or fears will really go far in your classroom. There are two really good resources that have been shared with me recently, and some a while ago. But if you're looking for help in kind of modeling tough conversations, Teaching Tolerance is always my go-to place, and I'll share a link in the message here. But Teaching Tolerance has their Let's Talk series, and there was an article that they shared that was posted, titled "What Will You Do on Wednesday?" Teaching the 2020 election. It was a really good article, kind of supporting this idea of pausing and providing space and time to talk. And the children are listening, they're watching, they're in tune. And I think it's important for us to model that dialogue. So thank you for joining, and we'd love to see if there are any other resources or things that you do to help press pause and create time in your classroom, even when it feels like there's a lot. So feel free to share. I'd love to see it. Thanks for joining.